Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, where we work every week to bring you positive things that are going on in public education today. We have a special guest today to come talk to us about something that some of you may have already been hearing about on the news, and rightly so. We've asked Professor Freedom, Clarence Glover, to come and help frame further the 400th anniversary of the observance of the enslaved Africans that came to America in Jamestown in 1619. So welcome, Professor Freedom.
Glad to be with you, Dr. Good.
And so you brought some things with you today, along with a lot of just very historical information that you were part of. So quickly start taking us through that journey, because we're going to run out of time before you run out of talk, I'm sure.
Well, thank you so much. Well, yes, this is the observance of the 400th year when 1619 Africans were brought to America by European Americans in Jamestown, which is really what I like to consider the beginning of the multicultural experience in this nation. We were not a nation then, but we were on our way to becoming a nation, and slavery had not actually started. Indentured servitude and then eventually slavery evolved because of the ownership of African people, as a perception of ownership of African people. And so
what makes you say that it was the first multicultural happening in
because you had many parts of the world, you still had people living in what I call cultural pockets. You had Europeans living in Europe, you had Asians living in Asia, you had Native Americans living in this country. But this was a time when, of course, Europeans came here and the Native Americans were here, and then the Europeans went and brought Africans here. And so we began to see these cultural pockets come together here on this land, which eventually became America. And so I like to suggest it was the beginning of an experiment, a multicultural experiment as people, and then as a nation, particularly as America. And so now we've been trying to work through this experiment for the last 400 years.
Okay, so talk a little bit about what you've brought to show us so that we can further understand how we can get better at this experiment.
Well, certainly as an African American, I try to say as a multicultural American, because my life experiences reflect that of many African Americans and even European Americans, because we are really connected by kin, if you will, blood. Mm-hmm. Because in my own maternal family, on my mother's side, I have my great-grandfather here who raised me as a child, who I grew up under, and his wife, my great-grandmother. So I knew them, and they shared many stories with me. As you can see, my great-grandfather, many times when I show this picture, said, he's a white man. Well, yes, his mother here, whose father was European-American, white, as you can see. And then I have my great-grandmother's mother, both of whom were enslaved, came out of slavery, were born into slavery, but they were able to come out of it as a result of the Emancipation Proclamation. And so then I brought some of the artifacts of slavery here, of course, which is an actual set of shackles, which these particular shackles would have been used on the neck of a person as they were brought out onto a ship, brought out to sell, and then other chains will be placed through here to keep them connected to others. And I always like to say that slavery was a dual system, because whoever was in the shackle was enslaved, and whoever had the keys to the shackles, they were enslaved, if you will. So you had the enslaver, who was enslaved psychologically, and you had the physical person. So slavery has always been a dual system, and one in which we work. And so we just have the picture, Lest We Forget, is a book about slavery, and then cotton, of course, which is the key product that made slavery so successful, meaningful. I say for purposeful for those who had plantations, etc. And we're sitting now in areas of Dallas that were once cotton fields in North Dallas, the Cotton Belt Line and things like that. And below this is a documentary that I did on Dr. King with Mrs. King in 1986 in Remembrance of Martin, which Dr. King alluded to in the 1960s. He says, and in Washington, D.C., as a matter of fact, 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. So he was alluding to that period, that in spite of the fact that they were in the 60s, he was suggesting that we were still not free, that we were still suffering from the vestiges of slavery.
Now, you have done a lot of your philosophy, your demonstration around cotton and
Yes.
picking cotton. Can you talk a little bit about that and about the analogy that you have come up with to help other African Americans understand the approach that you have towards cotton?
Well, as I say, is I have a cotton sack here, and this is an authentic cotton sack that we have right here. And so often many of my friends who look at these objects are very upset. And I certainly understand about the shackles. I am upset about the shackles, yes. But I am not upset about the cotton, because the cotton was not the problem. It was slavery or the condition that was the problem. So I like to compare that to my work in South Africa in terms of on the South African apartheid movement here in Dallas in the 80s. And now I've come with this analogy that what do you think would happen with the South African men, particularly in the diamond mines after apartheid? Do you think that after apartheid they said, well, we don't want these old dirty diamonds, you can take them, and if they will, I don't think so. I think they'll say, no, give me the diamonds. We'll keep our diamonds.
We'll keep working the diamonds.
We'll keep working the diamonds, yes. I'll go dig more diamonds.
That's right.
But let me get benefits from these diamonds. This is white gold. King cotton. So it was not the cotton. Cotton is the gold, if you will, of our nation. And so therein, I'm a cotton picker, and so I have a brief video there of me picking cotton that talks about the work ethic and that we can share.
Okay.
Hello, this is Professor Freedom. How are you doing? I'm down in Central Texas here in the cotton field, and I'm in the midst of picking cotton. This is real cotton, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. And Professor Freedom is out here just like our ancestors used to do. And I'm just excited about doing this. And here I am, I put it in my sack. There we go. We just pick this cotton you see here. You got to pick it between these bowls right here. And that's what you have to do. And just pull it out. So we want to let you see us do it down here in Central Texas cotton. But this is how our ancestors did it back during slavery and during Jim Crow era. But there's nothing wrong with the cotton. There was something wrong with not getting paid for picking the cotton. So we need to understand the difference between working hard and not getting paid for working hard, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm glad you joined me for a few seconds today. This is Professor Freedom, wishing you a cotton picking day.
All right. So I'm hoping that this helps further your people's understanding around your continual work around bringing cotton to our students, because I know that there have been some people who, again,
They're challenging.
Yes, and so that's a good analogy that you have. Let's go back a little bit. You were very active in the 70s and 80s. Talk a little bit about that time period in your life.
Well, coming out of the community and the plantation community and farms that I grew up in, again, cotton was not the problem, but as my theme says, I say, I want to take the chains off your brain so your minds can work. And so that started a long time ago, back during the 70s when I was in high school and was among one of the first African Americans, for an example, to go to Washington, D.C. and be a part of the National 4-H Congress, where I worked on civil rights issues. And that's a part of taking the chains, because it was not only taking the chains off my body and mind, but also of those who I was working with, many of my European American colleagues, friends, and so forth, trying to help them understand that, again, that this is a dual movement, that the civil rights movement is a dual movement. Dr. King said the civil rights movement was designed to save the black man's body and the white man's soul. So he always saw it as a dual movement together. And so from there, it just led on to many other things in terms of working with.
Let's talk about that. You spent some time at SMU.
Sure, yes.
So talk about that time period.
Well, I came there to work on my master's in theology, and coming out of Louisiana, where I was pastoring, the CME congregation at the time, and I came to Perkins and started my master's in theological studies, and eventually I got involved in Student Senate, and eventually became involved in the student affairs, and eventually became a full-time staff person. Well, at that time at SMU, it had the second largest KA flag on top of the house, and I was engaged in, trying to remove those things from the campus.
Is this the 80s?
Yes, the 80s, 1980 as a matter of fact. So that we had these tensions, these very deep racial tensions at the time. We had the Old South at the time at SMU, and so we had to help staff, students understand that if we're going to be a multicultural campus, that we must understand the sensitivities of others and the concerns of others, and be it African Americans, Asians, the Jewish community. And so then I became advisor to African American students, and eventually director of multicultural of student affairs and an adjunct professor of African American studies. So within all of that, we were able to work with students and program councils, career councils, and so forth. And the whole intent was not to have a minority program, was to have a multicultural program where not only students of color, Hispanic, African, Asian, but also European American students and staff were working together again to try to make this experiment that we started back in 1619 to become a reality, because we were still suffering from some of the vestiges of all of that.
So how did you help SMU change some of its policies and develop its cultural philosophy? And the reason I'm digging is because I'm going to transition over the course of the next few minutes in how you did that with us. So how did you do it in a big place like SMU?
Well, of course, SMU, and it's interesting because we had incidents then as we're having incidents now. And we had incidents at that time. But also I worked with Mrs. King and Mrs. Parks and Dr. Bernard Lafayette. I was working at the King Center in Atlanta, helping to train students in nonviolent strategies towards social change. So I was going back and forth to Atlanta at the time during the 80s and 90s to the King Center for Nonviolent Social Change. So when incidents arose on our campus at SMU, I was able to apply some of these principles, and we were able to develop legislation, because Dr. King told us that we needed legislation in place. We needed laws, we needed things in place. So some things that happened on campus, and we put together diversity harassment policy, one of the first, if not the first, in the country at a major university. And that policy then, the Judicial Council and so forth was able to use that when things happen. And so that policy is on still to this day, and many other campuses later on fashion their policies. And then we have training, the intergroup living seminar we developed, our multicultural awareness programs. We developed Blue and Red Day, which was the largest simulated segregation day in the nation, patterned after Jane Elliott's Blue Eye, Brown Eyes experiment after Dr. King's assassination, but we divided the whole campus. So at SMU, we were able to do a number of things, and while there, I also found Dr. King's speech that he gave there in March of 1966. Many people didn't know that, but he did speak at SMU, and you can go online now and hear the speech and see the articles that I found and framed his speech here in Dallas, which was on integration. And again, here we are in 2019, still working to make this dream a reality.
I'm just curious, how'd you find that?
Dr. Willis Tate told me about it. And
because that wasn't online in those days.
No,
so
it was not.
It was hidden in some little.
It was hidden in the Goya Library, and Dr. Willis Tate, during his life, he and I would talk, and he mentioned to me, because so many people said Dr. King didn't come to Dallas and do anything, so he didn't have a movement, but he said that he spoke, and so I began to look around, dig into the archives and into the school, and then I found the tape, and I found the articles that you can see now online, and I had them framed, and they're in the Student Center, and now you can go online and hear his speech that he gave at SMU, which I think is so instructive today and historical, and for us to hear, and schools should be using it here in Dallas. We should be using that speech. It's transcribed now. There's a transcribed portion, and there's an oral portion, and we in Dallas should be using it, because for Dr. King to speak at a major university was not a common occurrence during that time. So we're very fortunate.
So we'll put a link in the post to that, so that people can access it more easily. Matter of fact, we will put a a link to most of the things that we're referring to today, just so that people can access it easily.
Yes.
This information is so important that we don't want to make it any harder for them to get to it.
Correct.
So after SMU, that you transitioned to one of the largest ISDs in the country.
Well, yes. Here again, the issue of race and racism pulled me from SMU to the Dallas Independent School District, where at that time, during the early 90s, there was some very intense racial issues going on in the district, DISD district. I had worked with the district while at SMU, particularly to change the name from Black to African American, because I'm an advocate that there is no Black geographical context in terms of there's no Black place called Black continent. There's an African continent. So being an African American is what I have referenced in my research, that we have pushed that further before I got to the district, when I was on a committee in DISD to change the name from Black students to African American students.
So help me understand the context. Was that something that was coming from another part of the country, or is that developed here? What?
Well, no, it was. I was on the committee. That was a committee at DISD. And it was just my personal.
But that's a nationwide term that's been in use for now decades.
Yeah,
so
right.
That started in
Dallas
ISD?
Yes, Dallas. It was
really?
Before, because
Wow.
we was all Black primarily across the country, and it's just like the textbook adoption process. DISD is a very important district. When I got to the district, we put together the diversity harassment policy for DISD. And the training program around that, we brought that reaching to teach in a multicultural world. But also they had the multicultural education program with Dr. Yvonne Ewell and others had put in place, but they did not have a textbook component to be complement to that. So while at the district, I put together the textbook adoption process, multicultural textbook adoption process, and that then complemented the multicultural education plan. And as a result of DISD having the multicultural textbook adoption process, it affected the entire nation, because all of the major textbook companies, funds. Yes, exactly. And then we had an impact. A few years later, you may have heard where the state board debated it, and they began to undo some of that. And so, but that was done here and that. So DISD has been a leading player, because we had a program called Educating One Race, Many Cultures, which was a major district-wide program that came out of my office.
Well, talk a little bit about that philosophy that you have, that we actually aren't made up of a bunch of different races.
No, we're
it's just
not.
one. So talk
We're
about
just
that.
one race. Ashley Montague spoke about in his book, Man's Most Dangerous Myth, race. Race is a fallacy. It is not a fact. Is that we're not different races. It was the Swedish botanist Linnaeus, who, in identifying species of animals, and as Europe began to move out and see people of color, they placed people of color into what is considered an animal species identification. So rather than being human, people of color was identified as species, so that they use the word ethnic. For an example, when you hear the word, that's very ethnic, that's ethnic food, that's an ethnic dress, it meant something that was non-European, you see. And so you saw the distinction. Well, now the research shows us, particularly Richard Leakey, Louis Leakey and Alice Leakey, they're in Kenya. And their son came to SMU, Richard Leakey, and I have an article. I was at his lecture, and I have an article that he did. And he challenged SMU then that all of us are descendants of Africa, and that we come from a common DNA source, mitochondria Eve, and he knew it upset some people. But now you can go to Spencer Wells' work in terms of Journey of Man, is called, a Journey of Humans, I like to say. But there is a link you can go to now and pull up the journey and see how Africa, the DNA comes out and goes to Europe and Asia, etc., which connects all of us back. And it's suggested that we're actually 50th cousins, and that we are all connected in that biological, and just the melanin levels in our bodies, our hair and our skins are only very minute differences.
So we're all human beings, is what you're
We're all human beings.
That's the race, right?
We're all human beings, but we have our culture traits, meaning that music may be different, our foods may be different, and that's a part of the adaptation to our physical environment. But we are all basically human beings, but it's the cultural differences that we have not come to accept and respect. But if we affirm the fact that we are all one common human family, and that's why we say one race, many cultures.
So when you left Dallas ISD, you opened up your own Sankova business. You want to talk a little bit about
Sankofa Education Services, yes. And that was a result of my own journey going back to Africa. And on my father's side, this is my mother's side, but on my father's side is Glover. There were many Africans after being brought here to America after the emancipation. They went back to Africa, through Liberia particularly, and Talbots, Johnsons, Taylors, etc. Glovers were among that group of family who went back, and I had worked with the Ghanaian community here many years, and I knew of the story, this line, and so in 2004, I actually went to Africa, and through a very unique meeting, I met the Glover family in Accra, Ghana, and it was such a moving moment. And because of the stories that I knew and they knew how they connected, and so we have been able to connect and do other things. But that lets us know that there is a international connection here, just as Europeans go back to Ireland, France, Spain, Mexico, etc.
I did that this summer.
Exactly.
You know, my on my mother's side, both my great grandmothers were Irish, Ryan and Reed.
That's right.
Of course, I can't do much with that because that's like Smith and Jones. But
and then what happens? Many African Americans get stumped and they say, "Well, I can't do that." I say, "But at least you can go back to West Africa, because even with 1619, we're looking at the Africans who were brought from Angola, the 20." Who were brought from Angola. So we were not brought from East Africa, Central Africa, or South Africa. We were fundamentally brought from West Africa, and we see the traditions that are very common and connected.
Right. So you have been with Legacy now for 6 years, and what have you tried to do for us?
Well, because you and I, we come from a similar background at the ISD, and we value some of those same things. We saw things happening. I saw a great opportunity to really build what I call multicultural capacity.
Institutionalized.
Institutionalized,
right?
that's right. Mm-hmm. Institutionalizing multicultural capacity from the superintendent boards all the way down. And that was a great, great opportunity to do that. And you've allowed me to do that by writing policies and submit to the board, philosophies, policies, and then practices that that are expected. Because once they're institutionalized now, there are expectations that
right.
people should follow, and you when you do that, you create expectations of cultural respect, cultural awareness, self-esteem, knowing one's own culture and respecting others.
And that has translated into having a majority-minority staff,
yes.
which is very rare to find.
Exactly.
So we are majority-minority. Let me go ahead, since I have it up, and read the philosophy of Legacy, the cultural philosophy of Legacy Preparatory Charter Academy. It is that every educator and scholar's culture, i.e. history, language, dialect, family values, music, food, customs, is important to achieving academic success. Scholars' self-image, motivation, and academic achievement are all affected to the extent that Legacy works to include scholars' cultures in their education. Educators are expected to be committed to multicultural pedagogy and perspectives that will be practiced in lessons, activities, and projects. Multicultural pedagogy and perspectives will have an important emphasis in all subjects at all grade levels and in the entire district, school, and community environments.
Exactly.
So we've had that since our second year, I think.
Yes, second year.
We're starting our 8th year. And that has, your role has I don't know if I should use the word transition, but we started you doing some very traditional things. You met with teachers. Sure. We had you in front of kids, but now you've been with us long enough to where you are impacting kids over time. You have a mentoring program. You have a gentleman's group. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, as you just said, our basic foundation was in our mentoring program, of course, and then PTOs and work with parents, and then teacher training, work with educators. And by doing that, we were able to establish, particularly for veteran teachers who are somewhat veteran teachers. Now, because I've noticed in the district, you have teachers who come on board, then you have some who've been here, but they sort of share that cultural pedagogy and information and their planning process, and it's infused. So you have leaders who are now understanding that this is who we are. And this is what we do. So that when we are teaching when you're doing curriculum, in this diverse population, you have students who are predominantly students of color, and they know that they're being affirmed, their styles of learning are being affirmed, while at the same time they're learning about each other.
We're starting, matter of fact, we're starting our 4th year of restorative practice, which is a social justice discipline management technique. I hate to use the word technique because it sounds so clinical, but it's about understanding that we have to reach our kids.
Correct.
And they have to be respected, and they have to feel that respect.
Right.
You can't punish the trauma out of a kid.
Well, that goes along with what SMU I studied under Dr. Lawrence Kohlberg at Harvard in the area of moral education and human development. And he put forth what we call just school theory. And in a just school community, you have the stages of moral decision making, where students are part of that, where they're part of creating. That's why in my program I have 4 C's, I call them the 4 C's. There's cognition, culture, character, and citizenship. And particularly in the citizenship, they are part of the community. They are part of the body. And so we try to let them know they have to make governing decisions. And as you say, in restorative justice, when something is wrong, how do we work through this and find out what went wrong, and how do we restore a community back to a just environment
Instead of punishing.
We're learning it, yes.
Yeah, that's such it's been amazing how hard it is to get our adults to embrace the thought of not punishing kids for behavior, but to try to understand what's causing, what is the root cause of that behavior and the way it's playing out. So, but we're working hard at it.
What I think what happens is that the understanding of actions and consequences, and the word punishment, I think, may not be an appropriate word, but when students, because students and human beings will act out and do things. I think we're talking about the 1619 to 2019, and we're still seeing issues of injustice, and we're still seeing some negative things in our society. So how do we help people to be held accountable for their actions? That what are the negative actions that in a society, in a community, serve to disrupt the harmony and the order of that community? And if I am doing something to disrupt that harmony in that community, I have to take responsibility for that, and be it called punishment or whatever, but somehow understand that all of these things are, if you are a type of cyclical process, that if we don't pull one of them out in the cycle, then it continues.
That's right. Yeah, we really have really committed our district to getting better at restorative practice because it's just the right thing to do. We're almost out of time, so would you talk a little bit about what you have for us this year and your programs, and then we'll talk about summer if we have time. Otherwise, we'll have to have you back.
Well, we're just coming out of summer. How about that? We're coming out of summer into the fall. Where we've had some great summer enrichment programs, and with DART and SMU and the North Park and Mercedes, and we just want parents to be involved this year. This year we're going to put a particular emphasis on parents, strong emphasis on parents, because we need them. And so we start our mentoring programs where I go to Plano and as well as Mesquite, after school programs, and young men and women have grown up in this program. Some of them have been since kindergarten, some of them are graduating, getting to be seniors, and so we're seeing this developmental process. And I like to begin to follow them, see how they're doing, and want to also work with the teachers more this year to see how what we're doing and what is happening in the classroom is connecting with the parents, with the teachers, excuse me. And then also with our parents, I've talked with the campus directors about having more activities with Professor Freedom and the parents, so that they would come out, pizza with Professor Freedom, activities, so they can really do things at home to help complement the things that we do both in our after-school programs and in the classroom. And then with our gentlemen's class, which is just young men who
you took them to the Cadillac place this summer.
No, to the Mercedes.
Mercedes, Mercedes place.
Once a gentleman, always a gentleman, you know.
And you brought ties to our seniors at graduation.
Graduation, the Mercedes, yes, Mercedes, and Ford to our partners, and we are growing our business partners to be with us. And once a gentleman, always a gentleman, and helping them to understand their transition to manhood and that legacy. In Plano, we're working with the fashion show there, the ladies program.
Yes.
And so slowly it's beginning to evolve, and parents are talking about how important that has been. They're calling us saying they want their children their sons to participate, and we're going to be doing more at Mesquite because we have a strong one over at Legacy Plano. So we're really excited about this year and what's getting ready to happen.
Well, we certainly thank you for coming and helping us further our understanding of cultural philosophy, what it is, how we need to get better at it, and what a big part you've played in Dallas, and then some of the things that happen in Dallas that have worked nationwide. So we certainly thank you for your civil rights contributions. You forgot to mention you were inducted to the African American Hall of Fame.
Yes, just recently I was inducted to the Dallas County African American Heritage Hall of Fame, and we had our induction ceremony. So I was very, very proud and very humbled to have received that.
Well, you're finally getting some recognition for that hard 40, 50-year work that you've been doing, right?
Thank you.
So anyway, we're out of time, but we'll have to have you back. There's things that will be going on, especially your summer work. We don't ever get enough kids for your summer work, so we're really going to try to get some more marketing.
Get the parents involved, and so they can make that commitment early.
Yes.
And because the programs are quality, everything from the Bush Museum.
It just pains me when I don't see you have higher numbers.
Yes.
Because of not only where they go, but what you have the kids do.
Yes.
So, having said that, thank you again for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for bringing your artifacts and for making another quality show for us.
Thank you so kindly.
Thank you for tuning in to the Ask Dr. Be Good show. For more information on Legacy Preparatory Charter Schools, visit our website, legacypca.com, or call 469-249-1099. And remember to like us on Facebook, where we stream live weekly Tuesdays at 3 p.m.